Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN, of whom, more in a bit. A few weeks back I was at an open weekend at the London Transport Museum's Acton Depot. If you're into London's transport, or London in general, or transport in general, you should really check this place out. It's basically where the museum sends their stuff that's not cool enough for the main museum, but is still historically important. You know, the kids are all, "I say, mother, this City and South London railway locomotive is bussin' for real for real. However, I'm afraid to say this Sleet locomotive is highly cap, on God." One of my favourite parts is the sign gallery. When I was there, a woman in front of me was marvelling at the signs from closed stations, like Ongar, Aldwych, and Goodge Street. Now the thing about Goodge Street is, it's very much open, but I sort of see why she might have been confused. Goodge Street is a bit of an odd one. It tends to slip people's minds. It's in the West End on Tottenham Court Road on the boundary between Bloomsbury and Fitzrovia. One stop north takes you to Warren Street, where there's interchange with the Victoria Line. One stop south takes you to Tottenham Court Road station, where there's interchange with the Central and Elizabeth lines. By comparison with those two, Goodge Street seems like a bit of a nothing stop. It's only on the Northern Line. It has lifts rather than escalators, which indicates that London Transport didn't consider it a priority in terms of passenger numbers. And it never seems to be all that crowded. Goodge Street was opened on the 22nd of June 1907 by the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, better known as the Hampstead Tube. Back then, the station was named Tottenham Court Road. And if you're curious, the station that's now Tottenham Court Road was originally named Oxford Street. But to make things even more confusing, the Central London Railway station, next to Oxford Street station, was already called Tottenham Court Road. Now, I personally think that Goodge Street is actually a better candidate to be called Tottenham Court Road because it actually is on Tottenham Court Road, unlike Tottenham Court Road. I have said Tottenham Court Road so many times that the words have lost all meaning. Regardless, on the 9th of March 1908, the Hampstead Tube guys renamed Oxford Street to Tottenham Court Road, and Tottenham Court Road to Goodge Street. Goodge Street is a bit of an odd thing to name the station. It's not exactly a prominent street, and the station isn't even on it. But I suppose if you've got to call it something, you might as well call it that. So, what about the station itself? Well, it's your classic Leslie Green-style station on the outside, with the oxblood tiled facade and the flat roof. The building on top was constructed in 1925. The lamps on the outside are original, and in fact have been copied when other stations have been renovated. It has two entrances, or rather one entrance and one exit. The Hampstead Tube was built by Underground Electric Railways of London, which used a lot of American expertise thanks to its co-founder, Charles Tyson Yerkes. One of the American innovations brought in was the concept of crowd control, and the idea at Goodge Street was a one-way system for passengers. That's why there's a station name above one set of gates but not the other. Alterations at other stations mean that this feature has largely been abandoned elsewhere. And to be honest, it's not used much at Goodge Street outside of rush hour. At the weekend, for instance, the exit gates are locked and you have to leave via the entrance. Now, navigating the tube is difficult, but do you know what's more difficult? Navigating the series of tubes that is the internet. Do people still use that meme? Well anyway, that's why I'm glad that today's video is sponsored once again by Surfshark VPN. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want all and sundry spying on me when I'm going online. It would be ruinous if people find that I sometimes frequent the subreddit r people who have no strong opinions about Charles Tyson Yerkes. So I'm very glad to have Surfshark, which is a very neat VPN that gives me a layer of protection against online snoopers, thanks to its advanced encryption. It also has servers in over 100 countries, which means that I can get access to streaming services from other countries to wring the most value out of my various subscriptions. And I can even use it to get access to bargains while shopping online by taking advantage of region-specific pricing. I don't know if any of those servers are near to Chicago, although as someone who obviously must have strong opinions on Charles Tyson Yerkes, I probably should. What's particularly good about Surfshark is that it can be used on all platforms and unlimited devices at no extra cost, meaning that not only can it save you money online, but it's excellent value in itself. Because we can't all be millionaires from Chicago. If you go to surfshark.com/jago, or click the link in the description, or follow this QR code, you can get 4 months extra free. Anyway, back to the world of tube lines set up by certain American businessmen whose names I have temporarily forgotten. The Hampstead tube stations were built with the name tiled into the wall and a unique colour scheme at each stop. Again, this was probably for the purposes of passenger flow. It's also commonly theorised that it was to help illiterate passengers to know their stop, but I don't really buy that. Literacy rates weren't that much worse in 1907 than they are today. Anyway, Goodge Street was built with those features, but they were lost when the current tiling was put in the late 1980s. Of course, that tiled station name was a bit counterproductive, given that it said Tottenham Court Road. It would soon be obscured by adverts. If you want to see the original colour scheme, check out the emergency stairs. Also lost in the 1980s renovation was the original ticket office, which had features much like the ones preserved at other stations that are now appearing on the screen. One original feature that disappeared quite early on was the cloakroom. Originally, passengers could leave their coats, their luggage, and even their bicycles with the ticket office staff. I can't imagine that was very popular with said staff, and the service was quietly withdrawn in 1909. In the 1920s, there was a fair bit of labour unrest on the Underground, and Goodge Street found itself the victim of strikes, closing twice. First in 1924, then during the general strike in 1926. Evidently it had few enough passengers that it was considered expendable. The station was originally fitted with 3 lifts, but it was so little used that before the First World War 2 of them were removed. In 1911, escalators started appearing on the Underground, but it seems that Goodge Street was never even considered for this. In 1937, experimental high-speed lifts were fitted in the vacant shaft. The main visual difference between these and the old lifts was that they were fitted with solid doors rather than gates, mostly so as to avoid unnerving passengers, with their incredible speed. The Ministry of Transport also recommended that plain-clothes tube staff use the lifts as often as possible to reassure users. The lifts were judged to be a success and remained in place until the late 80s. In fact, their replacement was the catalyst for the general refurbishment. Perhaps the most notable feature of Goodge Street isn't even in the station itself. On Cheney Street, there's a structure that looks rather like a concrete bunker, which is appropriate because that's more or less exactly what it is. In the 1930s, London Underground, which took the Hampstead Tube over in 1933, was playing with the concept of running an additional set of tunnels below the existing Northern Line, which would carry express trains. When the Second World War broke out and the Blitz got underway, the government went to London Transport and said, "So those new lines you want to build, pretty deep, are they?" And so they got together and came up with a plan to build a set of deep-level air raid shelters that could be linked up to form that new tube line. Now, Goodge Street was never intended to be a station on the express line. The shelters were, on the whole, not built where express stations were intended to be sited, probably because this meant that they could be built quickly and with minimal disruption to the existing stations. The Eisenhower Centre is the southern entrance, and the northern entrance is on Tottenham Court Road itself, kind of tucked away. The shelter wasn't used for its intended purpose, largely because the Blitz had eased off by the time it was completed. However, the complex did find an important purpose. It was, after all, bomb-proof, discreet, and very close to the British corridors of power. Therefore, in 1943, the southern section became a base for ETO-USA, which is short for European Theatre of Operations, United States of America. And who doesn't enjoy a night at the theatre? The northern section was used by the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, or SHAEF. The main purpose in both cases was communication. Indeed, the southern section was right next to the telephone exchange. General Eisenhower is believed to have made much use of this base, though it seems that stories of his meeting here with Winston Churchill to plan Operation Overlord are probably false. Still, there was evidently enough of a connection for the current owners to name it in his honour. Working conditions down there were cramped and unpleasant. The War Office also had some staff down there, and there was a certain amount of official squabbling over allocation of space. After the war, the shelter was used for billeting troops, and it was about as unpopular as it ever had been. In 1956, a fire broke out that burned for 24 hours, due to the difficulty of getting fire equipment down there. Trains actually still ran during the fire, albeit slowly, through Goodge Street. Miraculously, there were no deaths, but it led to a ban on the shelters being used for human accommodation. These days, the Eisenhower Center is used for the storage of documents. Another fire occurred at Goodge Street in 1981, and this one resulted in 1 death and 16 injuries. Following this, it was recommended that a smoking ban be put in place on the tube network, but this wasn't fully implemented until the disastrous King's Cross fire in 1987. These days, Goodge Street is one of those stations that is useful, just not as useful as some of its neighbours. Last year, 2023 if you're watching from the future, it had 5.11 million passengers, which probably sounds pretty decent, but neighbouring Warren Street had 14.08 million, and Tottenham Court Road had an incredible 58.73 million. For comparison, the least used station, Roding Valley, had 0.27 million, and the least used station in Zone 1, Lambeth North, had 2.69 million. I guess in a sense the thing about Goodge Street is it's kind of forgettable these days. It's not a major interchange, it doesn't serve a major destination. But it's also not a bad station. I guess you could say, it's Goodge enough. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this overpaid, oversexed and overhere tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. I would like as ever to thank my donors here on YouTube, on Patreon and on Ko-fi for your generous support of this channel. You are the Ike to my Eisenhower. I would also like to thank Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Click on the link in the description below to take advantage of their generous offer. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.